Hello, everyone. I'm Alejandra Lopez de Alba, and on behalf of the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, it's a pleasure to have you here today for this very interesting conversation and update on what is going on in Ukraine. And to this purpose, I will now let Dr. ARIBEL Contreras take the lead and moderate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon also in Ukraine. It is my pleasure to welcome you all in this event named The War in Ukraine, 3 years in, updates from the ground. On behalf of the Russian-Ukraine conflict working group in COMEXI, I'm delighted to be your moderator. I am going to give a brief introduction of this topic, and then I will be giving the floor of our main speakers. First of all, I would like to introduce you the three of our speakers, who are Professor OLEXIY HARAN, who is a research advisor for the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and also professor of politics at Kyiv Mohyla Academy. Ms. MARIIA ZOLKINA, who is the head of regional security and conflict studies at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and associate research fellow at the London School of Economics. Dr. Taras ZHOVTENKO is the acting executive director of this foundation and associate professor at the Ukrainian Catholic University. I should have to mention that with us is Ambassador Volodymyr Lakomov. He's a former ambassador to Brazil, Angola, and Pakistan, and now he is a foreign policy expert at this foundation. So thank you for your attendance, Ambassador. And also, well, we have with us Mariana Prishavnyuk. She started to learn about Mexico and she's studying disinformation related to this topic. To our attendants, I would like to kindly request you to have your microphones off. We will be having at the end a Q&A section, so don't worry about having your questions and sharing your perspectives about this topic, because at the end we will have time for this. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us. I will share with you a brief introduction related to the last events that we have been living related to this war. The third anniversary of the Ukraine war came and went on yesterday, as the US is rapidly reorienting where it stands on the conflict. The tectonic shift was laid there Monday in the UN General Assembly, where the US broke with European allies and opposed Ukraine's resolution condemning Russian aggression and calling for the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. Instead, the US put forth a rebel resolution calling for an end to the conflict without laying blame on Russia for starting it. We all know that yesterday both resolutions were adopted. Meanwhile, France President Emmanuel Macron met with Donald Trump in Washington yesterday in an attempt to realign the US and Europe. During this meeting, Trump declined to label Russian President Putin as a dictator and incorrectly claimed that the US has spent 3 times more than Europe to support Ukraine. He's expected to brief European Union leaders today ahead of a potential defense summit on Sunday. UK Prime Minister Starmer is also expected to meet with Trump in Washington on Thursday to discuss Ukraine's security. Setting the record straight on funding, European countries have collectively exceeded America's support, providing around $138 billion in allocated aid compared to US $119 billion. When factoring in additional pending commitments, Europe's lead increases further. However, nearly 80% of European Union institutional financial support consists of loans, and yesterday we listened President Macron highlighting this point. Excluding loans, the US has given around $60 billion, in aid to Ukraine, according to information provided by the University of California, Berkeley. Also, Trump told Macron that he may visit Russia if peace negotiations succeed, which he suggested could happen maybe in a couple of weeks. The visit could be the first for an American president in over 10 years and would be a boon for Putin on the global stage. The president of Russia offered to sell rare earth materials to the US, including those from occupied territories of Ukraine, emphasizing his message to Trump that financial opportunities exist in Russia. Are we witnessing a new era of neocolonialism with the agreement that Trump is pushing Ukraine to sign about the commitment to access the rare earths and critical minerals? This is a question I'm leaving here openly. So let's begin with our speakers' perspectives. First of all, I would like to present Professor HARAN, who is going to give his opinions and perspectives related to the domestic politics, ruling party opposition discussion on elections. Professor HARAN teaches comparative politics at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. He was a dean and organizer of the Faculty of Social Studies at Kyiv Mohyla Academy. He also served as research director at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, a leading Ukrainian analytical and sociological think tank. His latest book is named From Brezhnev to Zelensky, Dilemmas of Ukrainian Political Scientists. He has spent several weeks at the front line, including Donetsk airport. And well, as you can imagine, his experience for the last years has given him to become a very important voice in order to have his insights today. Dr. HARAN, the floor is yours. Thank you. You have your microphone off. Can you put it on, please, Dr. HARAN? We cannot listen to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Yeah, it's complicated development since Trump re-election, and what Ukrainian analysts believe in general right now, that so far there are no fatal decisions from the United States regarding Ukraine, but the general atmosphere, because of rhetoric, it's definitely deteriorated. That's true. So, and one of the example which you quoted, Dr. ARIBEL, is, well, actually two resolutions in the United Nations. One is Ukrainian, the other is American, and American resolution, draft of the resolution didn't mention aggression, didn't mention restoration of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Basically, it was repeating Russian narratives since the beginning of the war, which is very strange for us. However, what is interesting, that after that, to American draft of the resolution, there was a Russian amendment, which was declined by the General Assembly, and there were 3 amendments from Europe, which were adopted. So basically now, So now it appears that both resolutions are adopted, both Ukrainian and American one with these amendments, and now American one with amendments looks more or less fine. But the situation was really dramatic. Now, regarding what's going on in Ukraine and all this talk about elections, frankly speaking, I think that this is wonderful psychological operation of Putin to talk about unlegitimacy of Zelensky and talk about re-election, which for some reason was bought in many countries of the world, all in global south, also some in the west, even in the United States. So let's analyze it. Look, we are at the stage of war, and the whole territory of the country is bombarded by drones, missiles. We have air alarms. We have actually bombardment every night, okay? And we have air alarms in Kyiv every day. So the question is how to conduct elections in this situation. So there is a security reason for that, and definitely when we hear arguments about civil war in the United States as a justification of the elections, come on, guys. You know, the United States were not bombarded by aviation, by missiles and everything else. It was, you know, mid-60s years of 19th century. So this is totally different situation right now. The closest example for us is the UK during World War II. And we know that from 39 to 45, the UK didn't conduct elections. So there is a security element, there is a legal and constitutional element. Because of the war, because of Putin's attack, we have martial law, and according to Ukrainian constitution, you cannot conduct elections under martial law. Why? Because there would be restrictions on democratic freedoms. So you cannot conduct really free elections if there is a martial law. Regarding parliamentary elections, it's in the constitution, it's very, very clear. Regarding presidential elections are not mentioned here, but they are mentioned in the law, in the, well, how to say it, закон про военный стан, it would be the law on martial law.
It's just a martial law.
Just
or martial law legislation.
Legislation, yes. But according to this legislation, there should be no elections at all. So, in judging from constitutions, there should be also no presidential and local elections as well. And finally, very, very important, that we need elections not just, you know, to tick the box, right? Because Putin is ticking the box in Russia for 20 years. We need real democratic election, which includes competition, which includes free speech, possibility to conduct manifestations, debate, and so on and so forth, which actually is not possible in the present condition when you have so many refugees, IDPs, 1 million soldiers, and so on and so forth. So these are, it's very, you know, that's why elections, we are not discussing elections. And 60% of Ukrainians are saying that there should be no elections during the war. Why? Because they would destabilize the country, they would divert attention of the Ukrainians to other issues. So basically, there is a consensus in the society. Recently, there was a statement of more than 100 civil society organizations regarding impossibility of elections during war. So for me, for many other Ukrainians, the question is clear from different points of view. Again, legal, security, possibility to conduct real elections, and so on and so forth. Now, regarding the issue of trust to President Zelensky, well, actually, it's interesting because definitely we would like to see some kind of renovation of the power, but it's impossible to do right now. So the question is about the is Zelensky trusted? And I will show you the results of the polls. Okay. Just a moment. Okay. Basically, there are different polls, including the poll which was conducted by National Republican Institute of the United States. It was in Ukraine, but this is a poll from other reliable source, Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, and they basically show more or less the same. So you see that the attitude towards Zelensky on the eve of the war was very, very critical. However, after that, after the beginning of the war, the trust to him skyrocketed and then gradually started to decline. But you may see that from May 24th until February 25th, it's more or less stable. And this is an interesting situation because we have democracy. We still have democracy even under martial law. We have a lot of criticism regarding president in media, in social media. So it's open. We are criticizing him. There's a lot of criticism. However, he is still, the trust to him is the best among Ukrainian politicians. So if theoretically we conduct elections, say next Sunday, the result would be that the first place is General Zaluzhny, who is retired from the army, who is serving now as an ambassador to the UK. He never said about that he is going to run for presidency, but his ratings are very high in Ukraine, and many people believe that he may become a president of Ukraine if he runs for that, when the time, would be ripe for election. So General Zaluzhny, and then President Zelensky, and then far, far away, all other politicians, including Poroshenko. Okay, so these are two top candidates, General Zaluzhny and Zelensky, President Zelensky. If we remove Zaluzhny from this equation, it's clear that for the moment, Zelensky would be number one and he will win if elections are conducted right now. So that's the situation in Ukraine right now. Therefore, I think all this talk about, conducting elections, that Zelensky is not legitimate, this is totally a bluff. And I think this is psychological operation from Russian forces, which for some reason is bought outside of Ukraine among international community. There is another issue, definitely. So we have basically political fight, opposition united with the ruling party at the beginning of the war. Now we see return of politics somehow, and there is a criticism from both sides. If we don't have elections, it may be overcome by creation of government of national unity. This is the idea which was put forward by opposition, but so far there is no progress in this idea. So just today, Ukrainian parliament adopted a resolution where it's very clear, and it was adopted by the votes from the ruling party and also from opposition and President Poroshenko's party, that we will have elections immediately after the end of the war and removal of the martial law. So it's very, very clear. And I am to stop here, basically. I'm ready for discussion, questions, debate about dictator, and so on and so forth, because we can criticize the president. We can do that, definitely.
Thank you, Dr. Haran. The questions and answers, we are going to leave that section at the end, if you don't mind.
Okay,
And
fine.
it was really interesting listening to you about specifically this martial law, that it's applicable to many countries like yours, in order to understand what is going on related to the possibility of celebrating elections.
Let me just add something to this graph, because you know, we agreed not to have electoral ratings during the time of war. So sociologists agreed not to publish, not to make them open. We conducting closed poll. So basically, this is a closed poll which was done in December, which was leaked to the public, maybe intentionally. What is interesting, the company which conducted this poll is quite close to Poroshenko, and still they show that Zelensky is much more popular than Poroshenko. So I would say that this poll is quite trustable. Thank you.
Our pleasure, Dr. Haran. Very interesting listening to your highlights, perspectives, and everything related to not just about Zelensky, but about what is going on in the understanding of legislations and the political scenario of Ukraine. Thank you so much. Now, we will move forward in order to listen to Ms. Zolkina's perspectives, who is going to be talking about negotiations and public attitudes towards them. And I have to share with you that she's an Ukrainian researcher and public policy analyst. She was head of regional security and conflict studies at one of the most authoritative Ukrainian think tanks, who is the Democratic Initiatives Foundation and Associate Research Fellow at the London School of Economics Ideas. Also, she was the research fellow who launched the Ukraine discussion series at the International Relations Department at the London School of Economics. She's also a senior member of the University Consortium, which puts together many different universities. She has been working in the fields of regional security, reintegration policies in occupied territories, and wartime diplomacy. She was invited by Al Jazeera, who is a media TV channel in Qatar, in order to be the special external expert related to Russian aggression matters. She also served as an external consultant to the Ministry of Information Policy of Ukraine. And well, her experience is focused in matters related to Ukraine and on the war and many other topics related to this. So, Ms. Zolkina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the broad introduction and introducing me basically to our audience. So yes, so I have been studying and learning. I have been studying, and working with the topic of Russian aggression since 2014. And namely, we started the program of regional security and conflict studies at DIF as a response to a new reality back 11 years ago, when the hybrid warfare in Donbass started and when Crimea was annexed by Russia. So basically, we do have a DIF, just for the interest of our audience, we do have, I believe, the best database when it comes to public opinion polls, qualitative, quantitative, and different public policy scenarios about diplomacy towards Russia, about conflict resolution strategies, about integration of temporary occupied territories. So pretty good track of records, let's say. Speaking about the current situation, I will allow myself to be much more harsh, let's say, and sharp than professor, if I may. That's my professor, who has raised me as an analyst, basically. But Looking deeper into what's going on diplomatic arena around Ukraine and these dramatic changes, I do believe that this is not just a challenging or risky atmosphere on diplomatic arena for Ukraine, but rather in new reality, new set of challenges, diplomatic and challenges regarding the possible negotiations, where the position of Ukraine is severely undermined within the very short period of time, is undermined already. And the main task for Ukrainian diplomacy in the weeks, not even months, but in the weeks to come, to prevent the further deterioration of diplomatic position of Ukraine. How do I come to that conclusion? So first and foremost, the problem for Ukraine right now is that the general status and roles of parties in this war has been shifting and changing due to, in my opinion, pretty pushing strategy delivered by Trump administration. What I mean is that being officially, internationally recognized undoubtedly as a victim of aggression, Ukraine was given a specific place where nothing about the destiny and the future of Ukraine, about its sovereignty and its right to make sovereign decisions about foreign policy choice, defense alliances, nothing was allowed to be decided without Ukraine. That was a long-term strategy of Ukrainian diplomacy, started back under the previous president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, and continued with the current president, President Zelensky. The strategy of Trump showed that direct negotiations or direct talks between US and Russia are happening not just as a fact. They are changing the status de facto of and roles of the parties. And unfortunately, Russian diplomatic isolation from at least the western part of the globe was finished and was ended not by some circumstances, but basically by the actions of Trump, who showed that Russia is a partner whom you can talk to. And most problematic is that you can promise something. That's the second problem for Ukraine and the second challenge for Ukraine right now, that all the demands and all the requests which Russia put towards Ukraine, towards the West, starting not just with the large-scale invasion, but starting from December 2021, when Putin declared so-called ultimatum to NATO, not to Ukraine. All these demands at that time were considered as unreasonable. I remind that they were addressed towards NATO because Russia first demanded, before invasion of Ukraine, demanded that de facto NATO's policy and even location or disposition of American forces or other NATO member states should be withdrawn de facto from the territories which became, or states which became members of NATO after 1997, which meant withdrawal of NATO in different terms, militarily or politically, from the whole Eastern Europe. Because the Eastern enlargement and Balkans enlargement was after 1997. And that at that time, in December 2021, was considered as unreasonable and completely unacceptable demand on this from Russia towards the West and towards Ukraine. Which was followed by the beginning of the large-scale war, and which was followed by demands towards Ukraine in particular. And Putin attempted basically to put some restrictions on Ukrainian sovereignty, which he tried to sell in exchange for, at that time, ceasing the large-scale war. These restrictions, they were not about just refusing to join NATO, but also about any kind of defense alliances, about the right to conduct even trainings with foreign states on Ukrainian territory. These restrictions which Putin demanded were about territorial concessions to Russia, because at that time there were already territories occupied by Russia. And all those demands were put as something unacceptable and were pushed away from the negotiation table at all. And 3 years after that, due to very pushing strategy, which we have been witnessing from Trump administration, within just 2-3 weeks, Putin has been de facto almost promised that he will get everything he wanted, or he has chances to have that, not maybe legally, but de facto, politically, to have all of these demands satisfied, even though Putin failed to succeed in achieving his goals and in making Ukraine to make all these concessions militarily. I think this disbalance will have significant and severe after effects and impact not only on Ukraine in particular, but also on European security, because the very idea of security and predictability in the nearest not months, years, or maybe at least a decade in Eastern and Central Europe is under big question now. And third problem for Ukraine within this negotiation new framework is that one of the most basic rules, let's say, was also undermined by Trump now. It's about, I'm speaking about the transatlantic unity when it comes to defense and security in Europe. It means that having nothing more than probably very cold relations or cool relations between main European capitals on the one hand and Washington administration on the other hand, European security is a matter and is a problem for Europe itself, which unfortunately Europe is not yet ready to take on their shoulder as their own responsibility. The reaction inside Ukraine towards the new developments, we have the very fresh sociological data, not from us, but from other very reliable and company and colleagues, which is Rating Group, who have published the first reaction of Ukrainians towards direct negotiations between US and Russia without Ukraine. And reaction is very predictable for sociologists and for political scientists in Ukraine and for Ukrainian society generally. 91% of Ukrainians is extremely against the very idea that US and Russia are talking about the conflict resolution without Ukraine. Going towards a topic of a ceasefire, the reaction of Ukrainian society, again, the latest data of these days, just on the wave of all this pressure from US, even a ceasefire will be rejected by absolute majority of Ukrainians if it's not followed by the security guarantees for Ukraine. 83% of Ukrainians think that ceasefire is possible only if there is a security guarantee for Ukraine the next day after. Otherwise, it will be considered as a complete vacuum of security, deterioration of disposition of Ukraine on the diplomatic and military fields. And from this point of view, we can understand that all this pressure on the political elites in Ukraine to be more open for negotiations or accepting basically what is going to be offered to Ukraine to accept will be a very difficult problem, because when your society back inside the country think that this is the wrong way and that Ukraine will be, by accepting something proposed by US and Russia, Ukraine will find itself in a worse position than we were before. It means that President Zelensky and any other politician will not be able to, even if he or she won't be able to sell this out in this very brutal form, which we are witnessing right now, to Ukrainian society. So I do think that Ukraine will be trying to balance, will be trying to stand still diplomatically, not to agree to the worst scenario, which is when Ukraine is not returned to the negotiation framework at all. However, I think I don't have any illusions, and I hate predictions and prognosis in political science, but I do believe that this year, even without direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, there is a high risk that US and Russia will try to declare a ceasefire. It's possible, in my opinion, even without having Ukraine by the table of negotiations, just giving Ukraine the new reality and saying that there is a ceasefire, Russia is stopping its active warfare, and you cannot not agree to that because we are not going to support you militarily anymore, to provide you with the means to continue one-side operation or of at least an active defense. So that's a pretty challenging situation, but I still don't think, and here I agree with Professor, that we are not in the deadlock, but we are going to be balancing this year and next years between bad and very bad scenarios for Ukraine, where the very existence of the state and resilience of the state, resilience of the society, survival of the state will be something we are going to fight even more actively than within the previous 3 years of large-scale invasion. Here I will stop and hope that I didn't raise too much pessimism, but I tried to be as honest as possible in my assessments.
We deeply appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. ZOLKINA, and I believe that all of us are now like thinking and having different questions related to this topic, because obviously I believe that Ukraine's diplomacy has to be stronger, because what I could appreciate is that the Global South countries did not respond as we could expect since day one. So thank you for your insights. Thank you for your perspectives, Ms. ZOLKINA. And now we are moving to Dr. ZHOVTENKO, who is going to be sharing his perspectives related to the situation on the front line, geopolitics, security, and disinformation. I would like to share with you that he is an international security and defense analyst. Before joining this foundation in February 2023, he worked as an associate professor and guest lecturer of special courses on national and international security. He has been working in topics like hybrid warfare, military policy in the National University Ostrog Academy and the Ukrainian Catholic University. He was a government employee and an international information security subject matter expert with Ukrainian and US think tanks, security and government institutions. He's a member of the Public Advisory Board of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. He holds a PhD in national security, and he authors over 100 scientific publications and analysis papers in Ukrainian and international journals. So as we can see, Dr. ZHOVTENKO will be giving us these perspectives related in these topics he has been working for the last years. So Dr. ZHOVTENKO, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great introduction. I would like to thank my colleagues for their bright insights, and I will try to show how those insights, which are more connected to political situation in Ukraine and to the international and foreign policies, how they match with the situation on the battlefield, and how the battlefield dynamics on the front lines in Ukraine influence what happens around Ukraine and what happens in the world, how those trends influence the regional and international security in general. But first of all, although the current situation on the battlefield looks much more like a stalemate, I would like to give you a few brief ideas of the previous phases of the war fighting in Ukraine for all of us, just to get the dynamic of the situation and the dynamic of the shifting of the situation on the battlefield, because we cannot fully understand the current developments if we are not aware of what had happened before, how it all started, and how the previous events and the previous battle trends influence the current situation. First of all, I would like to go back to what Maria has said about the events of the February 2014, when the actual Russian aggression against Ukraine has started. And this was the first phase of this war, which Russia wages against Ukraine. And on February 2014, Russia has invaded Crimea and started waging hybrid warfare in Ukrainian Donbas. And these events have directly influenced what happened 3 years ago on February 24, 2022, because from the military and strategic point of view, if we take a look at the beginning of this phase of a full-scale Russian invasion against Ukraine, which started 3 years ago, so the initial phase of this operation looked very much like what Russia has done in Ukrainian Crimea in January 2014. So initially, it was an operation which was deeply rooted in the experience the Russian war machine has gained since February 2014. So this was an element of the hybrid operation, which explained the moves the Russian military has made during the first days of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine in 2022. So the Russian troops were lightly armed, and they moved fastly deep into Ukrainian territory. And their objective was in 2022 was very much like the objectives Russian forces had in Crimea in 2014. So they had to capture and take control of the key political, administrative, and military centers and installations in Ukrainian territory, and then in this way to claim the control over Ukrainian territory. So it worked in February 2014 in Crimea. And Russians had been developing this hybrid approach to their military strategy for the 8 years of their war fighting in Donbas. And this Russian hybrid strategy has also been transformed due to the experience Russian military had in Donbas, because you might know, or you might have heard about the so-called Gerasimov doctrine. So this was a kind of a theoretical explanation by the Russian General Gerasimov. He is the chief of staff of Russian military, and he was an architect, an ideologist, I'd say, of the Russian hybrid strategy, which was directly applied against Ukraine, starting from February 2014. And Russian war fighting in the Ukrainian Donbas for 8 years, gaining not very big results, has shown Russian military that this pure hybrid approach to war fighting needs also to be transformed and needs also to be shifted. And if in February 14, we have seen that Russians were relying more heavily on their special operations forces and the mercenaries and the regular forces on the ground, the Russian Donbas operation has shown that relying mainly on those military components will not guarantee the win situation for Russian military, as Ukraine has successfully mobilized its own armed forces and deployed its army units to the battlefield. And if Russian military, Russian special operation forces, if faced with the massive regular forces of the opponent, they have very little chances of surviving in the battlefield. And in this way, Russian military has transformed their approach to hybrid warfare, and they, in the second iteration of this strategic concept, Russian generals has added a massive regular military component to those special operations forces and to those hybrid forces which Russia deploys in the military conflict. So this is how the approaches to the military strategy that Russia has been using in Ukraine since February 24, 2022 has been shaped. And this is how Russia has come to shaping up its own strategic approaches of using military in Ukraine in terms of this full-scale invasion. So this here is one direct link of how the events of February 2014, how they influence what has started to happen in Ukraine 3 years ago. And this phase, the next phase of Russian aggression to Ukraine, which started 3 years ago in the form of full-scale invasion, it was initiated as at the first stage, it was a hybrid operation, which relies back to Russian Crimean experience. But nevertheless, it had not had strategic success because Ukrainian armed forces also armed with the intelligence information from our Western allies, have known exactly what Russians were trying to do and how Russians were trying to do this. And in this way, Ukrainian armed forces were able to stop this Russian hybrid advancement deep into Ukrainian territory. And this way, the first phase of Russian full-scale invasion, its strategic objectives were denied to Russian military and political leadership. And this forced Putin's regime to rethink the situation and to reshape their own strategy. And at this this was a key point in one of the first key points in Russian the full-scale invasion to Ukraine, which started 3 years ago. And Russian military leadership was forced to reverse their own strategies to the strategic models which were more comfortable for Russian military commanders. So if we take a look at the historical context of Russian war fighting, we would see that Russian army in different historic periods, in different wars, always relied on the quantity of their troops, but not on the quality of their troops and arms. So Russians have always been amassing their troops on the battlefield, and they were keen to gaining victories by trying to drain resources from the enemy using their large quantities of the troops on the battlefield. So it's fighting with the numbers, and it's not fighting with strategy, or it's not fighting with technology on the battlefield. So that's a typical Russian war fighting approach. And since the first strategic plan of Russian invasion into Ukraine has collapsed, Russian forces had to reshape their strategy and to reverse it to get back to this war fighting with the numbers in Ukraine. And this presented a strategic challenge for Ukrainian armed forces because, as we know, numbers are the hard things and they can't be beat. And Russian quantitative resources are much bigger than the ones that Ukraine has. And this was also a strategic challenge to our Western allies because Ukraine has been relying heavily on the military aid and on the weapons and weapon systems, which has been shipped continuously to Ukraine, arming Ukrainian armed forces and ensuring their superiority on the battlefield. But here comes the geopolitical element of this equation, because if we speak only about the military, the military sphere, so this turning point, which I has already mentioned, was a very good point to finish the conflict and to ensure Russia does not have its strategic victory. But nevertheless, our Western allies has chosen a very different geopolitical strategy. So the Biden administration has seen the war fighting in Ukraine as an instrument of putting geopolitical pressure on Putin's regime and trying to resolve this war with using this political pressure and using more diplomatic means than the trends on the battlefield. And this resulted in the situation where the United States and our other Western allies has been supplying Ukraine with weapons only as much as it was to be ensured that Ukraine sustains the fight, but not wins the fight. So the objective of our Western allies was not to allow the situation where Ukraine gets a military victory over Russia on the battlefield. But on the contrary, the situation on the battlefield had to, the pressure on Russia had to grow with the worsening the situation on the battlefield for Russian forces. And this worsening of the situation was directly tied to the amount of weapons Ukrainian army has been receiving since the start of the full-scale invasion. This was a strategic mistake of our Western allies, viewing this war, viewing the military aid and assistance to Ukraine as a geopolitical tool to try to reason with Putin, try to put geopolitical pressure on him, and try to make him change his mind and stop this war. It really didn't work with Putin, and it really didn't work, and it couldn't work with Putin's regime because the West has been locked in this typical Cold War mindset of deterrence, which has worked during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, but it doesn't work here against Russian Federation. Simply put, because Russian Federation's political system differs very much from what the Soviet Union had. Soviet Union had the Politburo, the collegial government body. All the while, in current Russian Federation, only one person is making all the key decisions. This was a strategic mistake which denied Ukrainian armed forces direct victory on the battlefield, and which led to the prolonging of this war, and which led to the situation where this war started to become not only a factor of regional security, but a factor of global security. If we take a brief look at what happened on October 7th, 2023, in the Middle East, when the Iranian proxies has attacked Israel. If we take a look at the strategy which Hamas has been using to attack Israel on the October 7th, 2023, we would see that this strategy directly copies the strategy of Russian armed forces on the verge of the full-scale invasion into Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. Again, small, lightly armed groups of the warfighters driving deep into Israel's territory, and this is kind of the same strategy and the same tactics Russians has been using. So this is one of the examples of how this prolonged Russian-Ukraine war has started to influence regional and international security landscape. As for the military capabilities of Russian Federation, so as the war came to a stalemate, and as Russia has been always relying on the numbers on the battlefield, it might seem that Russia cannot be so easily defeated on the battlefield, especially considering that Ukraine doesn't have these numbers of manpower, of the tanks deployed, and of artillery shells to fire, and so on. But nevertheless, the key to the military aspect of the victory in this war against Russia relies on the, first of all, on the weapon systems which can be used from Ukrainian side and which can be supplied from our Western allies. And on the other hand, this military victory also relies heavily on the Russian domestic political situation. Russia has been suffering great losses, especially during the last, I'd say, 12 months of the war fighting, because they have been calculating that with the new American president, Trump, in the Oval Office, they would be granted the possibility and window of opportunity to use their own hybrid and political influence within the Trump administration to end this war and to end this war in favor of Russian interests. And that's why the Russian Federation, in their conduct of the war fighting in Ukraine during the last year, they had not been counting their losses. Although those losses were catastrophic, if we speak about, well, general numbers, but nevertheless, Russian army has been fighting heavily, and they were fighting with everything they had, and they didn't get any strategic move on the battlefield. And so that made the Russian political leadership to reach to North Korea, to reach to Iran, first for the additional weapon systems, and then for, if we speak about North Korea, for the actual manpower to be deployed in the Russian Kursk region. And the Kursk operation of Ukrainian armed forces is also a strategic move by Ukrainian army to try to somehow balance this stalemate and to balance the large numbers of troops deployed by Russian generals on the battlefield. Because the key to actually winning the enemy, which overpowers you in numbers, is to strike him as hard as you can. And if we take a look at Russian losses, with the Kursk operation added, Russia loses something about 1,500 men per 24 hours per day. So it's like 1,000 to 1,500, 1,700. If we take a look at the rates of Russian mobilization going on inside Russian Federation, without any other further restrictions, Russia can find additional 30 to 45,000 war fighters per month. With the rate of losses of 1,000 per day, Russia is in a very comfortable situation. So they lose 1,000 soldiers per day, but in 30 days, in a month, they get another 30,000 to replace those who died on the battlefield. But the higher the losses, the more problems it causes for Russian political leadership. And this is the key to have a victory over the enemy which tries to outnumber you. And the Kursk operation here added those additional number of losses to Russian overall losses, and it created a situation where Russian Federation was forced to go to North Korea and to ask for additional troops. And in this case, this Kursk operation, which continues to be conducted by Ukrainian armed forces, is also a very successful and strategically important decision which was made by Ukrainian military and political leadership. Because according to Russian military doctrines, any military unit which sustains losses of less than 30% of the manpower, the equipment, the weapon systems, is still capable to go on fighting. So if the losses in any unit are less than 30%, then everything is okay. But if the losses are more 30% and higher, then it causes problems. And in this case, the way out from the military point of view, the way out of the situation is to arm Ukrainian armed forces with more powerful weapon systems such as cluster bombs and cluster munition in general. Because if we take a look at the NATO strategic documents, there are scenarios for fighting the Russian military during the Cold War, also called for employing the cluster munition on the battlefield. But nevertheless, getting back to geopolitical reality, this stalemate which was created on the battlefield due to those reasons which I have already outlined, was viewed by Russian military and political leadership as an window of opportunity to try to outsit Ukraine, outsit Ukrainian and American president, because with the change of president in the United States, the Russian Federation has gained more instruments of influencing the American military and the foreign policy, and this way try to pursue their own objectives. But coming to an end and coming to conclusion, from my side, this prolonged war has caused a very substantial turbulence in regional and international security, and its geopolitical implications are already being seen all over the globe. Because one thing I would like also to remind us that for Russian Federation, war in Ukraine is just part of its grander strategy to try to reinstall itself as a world nuclear superpower. So Putin seeks to reinstall Russian Federation as a former Soviet Union 2.0, with all the spheres of influence in Europe, and in all other parts of the world, such as Asia, Middle East, Latin America especially, and so on. So this is a strategic priority of current Russian leadership. And Russian success in Ukraine, from the military and geopolitical point of view, would mean that the Russian Federation has a green light to go ahead and to try to use the current geopolitical situation in its favor, and try to pursue its own interests, and to try to broker a deal with the US president to renegotiate the spheres of influence in the key regions which Putin's regime views as its own in its own national interest. So I'll stop myself here. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward for the questions and for the discussions.
Thank you so much, Dr. ZHOVTENKO. I think that you provided us like a global overview in terms of geopolitics, defense, security, and that's why it's really important to understand the relevance of the security guarantees for Ukraine in this deal, in this peace agreement, due to all the key points that you have already mentioned. So thank you so much. And now we are going to move forward to the Q&A section. So I invite our participants to raise your hands and to open your microphone in order to provide and do your question, mentioning specifically, if it's possible, to which of our three speakers would you like to do that question. So please feel free, have your microphones on. And Alejandra, you raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for, very comprehensive updates on what's going on. And my question, a very specific question to Dr. ZHOVTENKO. You talked about the Gerasimov doctrine, and you explained a lot of what is going on the ground, but could you, just for the sake of clarity for everyone here, could you maybe go into a little more detail of what this doctrine states and its more specific applications? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I can talk hours actually about it, because it was part of my PhD research, and because my specialization is the US experience in information and psychological operations, and how they were conducted during the Afghanistan and Iraq military campaigns of the US in 2001, 2002, and 2003. So actually, the Russian hybrid strategy relies 70% on American experience of American IOPS and PSYOPS, And 30% of this Russian hybrid strategy is what is called the active measures, the intelligence operations of former KGB, former Soviet intelligence agency. And so if we speak about those 70% which Russians has borrowed, I'd say, from Americans, so this is the key the key elements of this hybrid strategy. And the first and very important thing is to know that the hybrid approach to war fighting stipulates that the military force is used to gain information and political superiority. So the army is not a tool to win a fight on the battlefield. Actually, it doesn't mean what happens on the battlefield. What actually is important of how you describe, how you put a context to the events on the battlefield. And this is the key to understanding Russian hybrid approach. They are utilizing their military not to gain pure military victory and not to proceed with the pure military objectives. Now, their operations are targeted and they are crafted to get, first of all, the information superiority, their domination in the information sphere, and in assisting Russian information sources to press with their own information and psychological operations. So this is the first thing to understand about Russian hybrid warfighting doctrine. So the next thing is that strategic military planning has to be reshaped and has to be crafted to again focus on the information victories and focus on the information influence. So when a commander, a colonel, or a general plans a military operation, he must keep in mind not what would be the outcome on the battlefield, on the in the physical domain, but he must first of all keep in mind how his actions would influence the information domain, how his actions would influence the public and the target audiences. And this is his priority. This is how he would have to conduct the military operations. And the third pillar of this US experience, which was borrowed by Russians and was actually tried to be also utilized by the Russian forces, is that all the military units has to be joined within the one information network. And they would have the information flow which is updated as quickly as it could be done. And each commander, each military unit has the general information about what's going on the battlefield. But this technical part of this equation was missed by Russians because they lack the necessary technology. But they focused on the things which actually are very closely connected to information and psychological operations. And this actually very matches very good with another component I've already mentioned, the component which is called the active measures. So this is a general name of the intelligence operations, which are aimed at the direct influence on the society and domestic policy of a target country. So this is the something that KGB has practiced for decades. And if you might know, one of the KGB defectors has slipped to Great Britain and then to the United States. His name is Yuri Bezmenov. And he gave a very extensive interview in the early 1970s to one of the American TV channels. I think it's CBS. And 50 years ago, he explained what Russia is doing right now. So he was the first officer that the West had his hands on, who was in charge of those operations called active measures. And he explained in his interview in very, very sharp details how Russia and how the Soviet Union, the KGB, had their strategies of influencing the public opinion, the political discourse in the countries of Western Europe, in the countries of Middle East, in the countries of Latin America, and so on. He explained the instruments, he explained the approaches, the strategies, and so on. And this is something that Russian intelligence services has been keen on, and they were very professional. They had decades of practical experience, and this experience was added to what Russians had learned from the American experience of the IOPS and PSYOPs, and this is how this Gerasimov doctrine actually emerged. So this is a combination of the old toolkit with the new information technology means and with the social networks and everything they have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. ZHOVTENKO. I
Sorry,
don't know if this, sorry. Yes, Ali.
Can I do a follow-up question if no one else is ready to make another question?
Yes, sure. I'm not sure. I don't know if Christelle Ortiz wanted to do also a question because she opened her mic, but well, yes.
Christelle,
Yes,
do you
go.
want to ask a question?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, okay. Come.
I'll go ahead. Just from what you just said, the first part, the Russians taking the American experience of the later decades of military operations and how to transform that into information operations. So as you were talking, I thought of the way, like, for example, during the first Iraq war, but definitely during the second one, you said, planning everything, not just for the battlefield, but for how it looks, how it plays into the narrative of whatever the US wanted to sell. And one of the I don't want to say best, but most recurrent exercises of that was embedding journalists into battlefield units, right? And this made me think, and I hadn't thought of this before during this conflict. Are Russians doing the same with battlefield units in Ukraine? Do they have embedded journalists? And I don't know if anyone else here has noticed this before. I don't think I've seen any reports coming from those embedded journalists. Of course, we don't generally consume Russian media. That might be the thing at heart. But I would like to, I see you nodding, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question because actually that is one thing that Russians are doing very extensively. But for Russians, this is a kind of a parallel media track of their media coverage of the war. So these correspondents, they are called the war reporters. And they are the majority of them is using Telegram as a means to communicate with their audiences. So it's a kind of a parallel information tool that Kremlin also tries to use to wage their information and psychological operations. And indeed, those reporters are embedded into Russian units which are fighting on the battlefield. Then they report on a daily basis. They are invited to have an online feed to Russian, regular media, I would say conventional media. And this is the way how Russians are using this very American experience, because you are quite right, because one of the problems for the American IOPS and PSYOPs, especially connected to the second war in Iraq, was to have a maximum positive media coverage of their operations. But I would, if I may, I would quickly mention one other thing which Russians have learned from the American experience, because when American commanders, this was after the major war fighting in Iraq was done, and the regime of Saddam Hussein was toppled, and then the U.S. forces in Iraq, they shifted to the so-called peacekeeping operations, and they were doing mainly searches and raids in the major cities of Iraq, looking for explosives, looking for illegal arms, and so on. And the US command was trying to present these operations as a fight against terrorists, as the saved lives of civilians, and so on. But the US commanders failed to have this presented in a very positive way, because everyone, when heard about these raids of the US military, they were saying that again, those Americans are violating the rules of civilians, and so on, the rights of civilians, and so on. And the Russians were observing closely, and while the Americans were wondering why they are failing in the information domain, the Russian war analysts and military analysts, they had find a cure for this problem, because the problem for Americans was that the troops that the Americans deployed, those troops were very easy to be identified as US troops. And everyone who has seen American soldiers immediately knew that these soldiers belonged to the US Army, and everything went as it went in the information sphere. What Russians has invented while looking into this, if you remove all of the IDs from the uniforms of the soldiers, you would create a situation when the local journalists would come asking questions: who were those? Were those your troops, not your troops, what you were doing, and so on. And in this case, you have the information monopoly. You have the priority of spreading the information, your version of the events. And this creates a perfect opportunity to shape the media space and to shape the information sphere. And this is something Russians has learned. And this is how the Russian unidentified green man has come to life, and we have seen them in Crimea in February 2014. So this is the direct American experience, which was studied by Russians. The mistakes the Americans made were removed, and it went as a hybrid scenario in Crimea in February 2014. And the Blackwater, of course, the PMCs, and using the PMCs on the battlefield. That's another thing which Russians copy-pasted from the US.
Thank you, Dr. ZHOVTENKO. We are almost at the end of this virtual roundtable, so I would like to invite somebody to do the last question. Because of time, we almost have to finish this. Yes, Ditzel Rodriguez.
Yes, hello. I'm very sorry I cannot turn my camera on, but I would want to ask, I would want to leave this question open to whoever wants to answer it. How do you assess the effectiveness of Western sanctions that have been put against Russia? And what additional measures would you advocate for in the present and in the future?
Does someone specifically, any of our speakers?
I can say a couple of words, and if
Yes,
my
Maria.
colleagues want to add. So generally, Russia hasn't been, let's say, Russian economy wasn't harmed and wasn't undermined as fast as it was needed, basically back in 2022 or 2023. However, the problem of sanctions and their effectiveness was just the tempo they were getting into force, in particular when it comes to oil and energy resources, in particular oil. But if we pay attention to two main problems which Russia was facing, the first one is the 3 years of sanctions, or at least in some cases 2 years of sanctions, have proved that that was a problem for Russia, and not as fast as needed, but incrementally Russian economy was cornered and was suffering. And based on the different international assessments, not even just Ukrainian ones, the main effect, severe effect of sanctions was to come in case new situation between US and Russia didn't happen before that. So that, I think, one of the biggest mistake from this point of view, that's one of the biggest mistake of US, that everyone was expecting, both diplomats and economists were expecting, that Russia will be willing to negotiate, or at least create the situation showing that they are ready to negotiate, exactly because next year was expected, 2026 was expected as the year when the real effect of all the sanctions, which were not as fast as needed, but were still introduced starting from 2022, were really going to show their effect on Russian economy. And the next problem for Russia, which is still now will be not a problem for Russia anymore, that please pay attention that we do believe that effective sanctions was successful, however, not as effective probably in the short-term future as we expected, but it was successful. And the proof for that was that among all the Russian demands within the last year, they were talking first and foremost about lifting sanctions. Before the negotiations started between US and Russia, Putin was speaking mainly about sanctions and lifting sanctions. And the main interest here was not to renew energy supply to Europe, for instance, because the route is closed from that point of view. Not for all the countries, but generally everyone survived without Russian gas in Europe. But mainly Russia needs high technologies, which is needed for military production, for defense production and industry. And getting which from the international market was a problem for Russia. Russia still succeeded to do that, however, using secondary and second and third parties routes. Now we do expect that at least partially sanctions most probably will be lifted if there is a political deal between Trump and Putin.
Thank you, Maria, for giving us these perspectives related to the question to Ditzel. And due to timing, we have to say thank you. Yes, Dr. OLEXIY, you want to add something?
Yes, just to add two phrases maybe regarding sanctions. So finally, we have 16th package from the EU, which they decided to adopt without support from the United States. And I think this package is really, really important. We shouldn't forget also about 300 billion Russian actives, how to say it, actives in English.
Assets?
Okay. Assets, which are frozen basically in Europe. So the question actually is how to proceed with that. But now let me try to forecast what Putin will do soon. If he's, has these continued negotiations with the United States, if they push Ukraine to recognize the ceasefire and freezing on the conflict, okay? So by doing that, first of all, he will destabilize the situation in Ukraine, because for Ukrainians will see that, we cannot regain the territories, that we are betrayed by our friends. It will be a huge blow also to the prestige of Ukrainian authorities. But what would happen next? Because we have a ceasefire, then Ukraine will be pushed towards election, okay? So we remove martial law, we organize elections, which again Russia would use to destabilize Ukraine. Do you understand that? Russia will use these elections to destabilize Ukraine, and then, depending on who will come to power, how it will develop, because there would be, kind of vacuum of force, and then they may restart aggression, because actually Putin is not interested in territories per se. He needs to crush Ukraine as a whole. So he may use it just to, regroup and to restart aggression from new Platsdar. So that is, I think, this is his idea. So we should be aware of it. Putin will not stop.
Yes, unfortunately, that's what we see. That's reality, and obviously, new topics, new approaches, and new research topics will have to move forward in terms of looking at the development of this war. So, on behalf of COMEXI,
Sorry,
yes,
I think Dr. Taras wanted to say something final.
Just
okay,
two
we
words.
just
Yes,
have one more minute, Dr. Taras, please. In
yes,
one more
I will
minute,
be as
please.
brief as I can. So
For 20
just
minutes.
to to continue what Dr. Haran has said, Russia will not only use this pause to regroup and restart the war fighting in Ukraine, but Russia would also use the experience it already gained in Ukraine, not only in the war fighting, but also in hybrid tools to influence elections. And Russia would use those tools further against Western European countries, against the countries of Middle East, countries of Latin America, and so on. The longer the Russia has a chance to test its own abilities in Ukraine, it sharps its own tools to use those tools against all other countries on a global scale. Thank you.
Final remarks before I say thank you. No? Okay, so I was saying that on behalf of COMEXI, we deeply appreciate and express our gratitude to the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, our speakers, and all of our special guests who join us on this virtual roundtable. Thank you so much. And obviously, this is not a goodbye. This is not the end. This is just a start of the future virtual roundtables that we can do depending on the future developments of this terrible event. So thank you so much. And as we say in Mexico, Viva Ucrania. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
organizing this. Yeah, thank you very much for all the efforts. Much appreciated, really.
Well, thanks for the team of COMEXI. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Gracias mucho.